My father thinks he owns the business I built from scratch after he laughed at me for leaving my job. Now he shows up to meetings pretending he's the CEO. When I fired him in front of the board, he said, "You owe me everything." But that wasn't even the worst part. So, here's the situation. I'm in my early 30s, and I built my own tech company from the ground up after leaving my corporate job. I left my father's mechanic shop years ago because I knew it wasn't the life I wanted. He never understood why I left, and over the years, he's made it clear he thinks I owe him everything. Recently, after my business started getting major traction, he barged into one of my company's board meetings, pretending to be the CEO, claiming that everything I built was because of him. When I fired him in front of everyone, he said, "You owe me everything." That's not even the worst part though. I'm still processing everything, and honestly, I don't know what to do next. I'm stuck between standing my ground and trying to salvage whatever's left of my family. Please, I need advice. I grew up in a small town in Kansas, where people stayed in one place their whole lives. My father, Thomas Klein, was one of those people. He ran a small auto repair shop, Klein Auto Repairs, which had been in business for years, and he was proud of it. He never talked about much else. There was no talk of dreams, of aspirations, or even of personal growth. It was always about fixing cars, working hard, and staying put. I remember looking at his rough hands after a long day and feeling this knot in my chest. I didn't want that life. I didn't want to be tied to a business that had no room to grow, no vision for the future. As a kid, I had always been curious about more than just the physical world around me. I loved the idea of technology, the idea of creating something that didn't exist yet. And as I got older, I realized that the business my father built was not the path for me. But my father wasn't one to understand that. He thought I was being foolish when I told him I was leaving for college. "You've got a good thing here. You don't need to go chasing some dream," he had said, shaking his head. His voice had been full of disbelief, but I knew I had to go. I moved to St. Louis for college and pursued a degree in marketing and technology. I wanted to create something impactful, not just something that people used because they had no other choice. But my relationship with my father never improved. He always saw me as the daughter who didn't appreciate the value of hard work. He never understood why I didn't want to work in his shop, why I didn't want to follow in his footsteps. After graduating, I worked for a tech company in the city for a few years, building my skills and learning what it really took to run a business. But something inside me kept telling me that I could do more. I had a vision for a software platform that would help small businesses optimize their online presence, something that could level the playing field for people like my father, who was good at what he did but didn't have the resources or knowledge to grow a business online. It was a huge risk, but I left my job and started Catalyst Innovations from scratch. I spent months working late into the night, building the product and finding investors. I didn't have the safety net that many people had, but I was driven. Slowly, my business started to take off. I landed a few small clients, and the recognition I had hoped for began to come. But still, I kept my distance from my father. He never understood what I was doing, and I never knew how to explain it to him. A few years into the business, I decided it was time to move back to Kansas City. My company had grown enough that I needed a larger space, and I wanted to be closer to my family, even if my relationship with my father was strained. But things quickly took a turn for the worse when I realized that my father wasn't just living in the past, he thought he was entitled to a piece of my success. It happened one afternoon when I was meeting with investors in Kansas City. I was sitting in the conference room, discussing potential partnerships, when I noticed a familiar figure standing in the doorway. My father. He was dressed in a suit, of all things, and he had a look of determination on his face that I had never seen before. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, stepping into the room like he belonged. "I'm Thomas Klein, the new CEO." I froze. I couldn't even process what he had just said. My investors exchanged confused glances. The team sitting at the table shifted uncomfortably. "Dad, what the hell are you doing here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but it was obvious I was furious. "I'm here to take over," he said, his voice thick with authority. "This business is mine. You've made your money. Now it's time to hand over control to someone who knows how to run a company." I felt a wave of anger wash over me, but I tried to keep my cool. "You're not the CEO. You've never been involved in catalyst innovations. You don't get to walk in here and claim ownership." He just laughed, dismissing my words like they didn't matter. "I gave you everything," he said. "This business wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for me. I raised you, taught you how to work hard. I taught you how to build something from nothing." The room was silent as my investors and staff watched the scene unfold. I could feel my blood boiling, but I knew I had to handle this carefully. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. "Security," I said calmly, pressing the button under the table. "Please escort Mr. Klein out of the building." His face reddened as security arrived and politely asked him to leave. He stood there, staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and anger. Before they could usher him out, he looked at me and said, "You owe me everything. Everything you have, everything you've achieved, it's all because of me." I was speechless. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to let him know that everything I had done was because of my own hard work, my own sacrifice. But another part of me, the part one hated, felt guilty. Was he right? Did I owe him something? As the door closed behind him, I sat there for a moment, trying to gather myself. My team was quiet. No one knew what to say. "Let's take a break," I said finally, standing up and walking out of the room. I needed to breathe. The next few days were a blur. I spent hours on the phone with my investors, reassuring them that my father's actions didn't reflect the company's vision or leadership. But the damage had been done. The story of my father's stunt spread quickly, and suddenly my name was tied to a family feud that no one cared about except me. I had been living my dream, building something I was proud of, but now it felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. My father didn't just think he had a right to my company, he thought he was entitled to control it, to take credit for every success, every failure. He was trying to rewrite the story of my life, and I wasn't sure how to stop him. It's been a few weeks since that day. My father hasn't contacted me directly, but I know he's been telling people that I owe him. He's told his friends, my extended family, anyone who would listen. He's painting himself as the victim, the one who helped me get to where I am. And as much as it infuriates me, I know there's no convincing him otherwise. My company is still running, but I'm not sure how to move forward. Do I continue to try to repair things with my father? Or do I cut ties completely and go on with my life, knowing that it'll always be an open wound? He's been such a huge part of my life, but now it feels like we're on opposite sides of something neither of us can win. I'm stuck in this emotional battle between loyalty and self-preservation. The guilt I feel when I think about him still nags at me, but I also know that I can't let him take what I've worked so hard for. I've spent the past few weeks replaying everything in my head, how it all went down in that boardroom, how my father walked in like he owned the place, how I had to kick him out like a stranger. It was surreal, and every time I think about it, it feels like a nightmare that I can't wake up from. I'll admit, I've been avoiding talking to him, avoiding confrontation because I don't know what else to say. What do you say to someone who thinks they own you and everything you've built? To someone who can't accept that their vision and your vision are worlds apart? I haven't answered any of his calls or texts. The few family members who tried to step in and act as peacemakers have been met with nothing but my silence. How could I possibly explain to them what was going on without it sounding like a family drama that no one can fix? A couple of days ago, my mother called. I hadn't spoken to her in a while. She's always been caught in the middle of everything, quietly observing, but never fully taking sides. "Sweetheart, I just want to make sure you're okay." I know things are tough between you and your father, but you're his daughter. He's not well. You should at least try to talk to him. She was right, of course. I knew I should try to make some kind of effort. But I didn't know how to do it. How do you go from firing your father in front of a group of people, to sitting down with him and pretending like it never happened? I'm fine, Mom, I told her. I could hear the concern in her voice. But he doesn't get to treat me like this. He doesn't get to walk into my company and try to claim it's his. I built this, and I'm not about to let him take credit for something he didn't even help create. I know, she sighed, her voice full of sorrow. But maybe this is his way of telling you he's struggling. You know how he is. He's proud, and he doesn't know how to ask for help. He feels like you've left him behind. He doesn't know how to deal with it, and maybe this is his way of reaching out to you. I could feel the lump forming in my throat. The truth was, I hadn't thought about it that way. I had been so wrapped up in my anger, in defending myself, that I had failed to see my father's own pain. I know it sounds terrible, but sometimes, it's hard to empathize with someone who has hurt you so deeply. I don't know how to be the person he wants me to be anymore, and that realization has been haunting me. I just can't let him take what I've worked for, Mom. He's crossed a line. I know, sweetheart. I know. But don't let this destroy your relationship with him. I'm just asking you to think about it. She paused, almost as if she were weighing her words carefully. You don't have to let him back into the company. But maybe you could have a real conversation with him. Just the two of you. It wasn't the answer I wanted. In my mind, he didn't deserve the chance to explain himself, not after what he pulled. But somewhere deep down, I knew she was right. This wasn't just about the business anymore. This was about something bigger. This was about family. I'll think about it, Mom. But I'm not making any promises. The next few days were a blur of meetings and decisions. I had a company to run, and I couldn't afford to let my personal life interfere. But I could feel the pressure building. Each email I opened, each call I answered, seemed to bring up more reminders of my father's stunt. The investors were still supportive, but I could see that some of them were a little uncertain now. They had never seen this side of me before, this conflict between business and family, and I wasn't sure how long they'd be willing to ride out this storm. But as much as my focus had been on keeping the company running smoothly, I couldn't shake the guilt. It wasn't just the guilt of firing him, of seeing the disappointment on his face as he was escorted out of the building, but the nagging feeling that I had abandoned him in some way. He had never been the best father. He wasn't emotionally available, and his idea of showing love was providing for us in ways that I didn't always appreciate. But still, he was my father. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me wanted him to be proud of me. One evening, after a long day at the office, I decided to do what I hadn't done in weeks. I called him. It was strange, dialing his number, knowing that the last conversation we had left so much unsaid. The phone rang a few times before he picked up. Hello? Dad, I said, my voice tentative. It's me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, but he didn't say anything. I think we need to talk, I continued. About everything. He didn't respond immediately, but I could hear the shift in his tone when he finally spoke. So, you're done with your little business adventure, then? Realized you can't do it without me? His words hit like a slap in the face. I tried to hold back the anger, but it was hard. No, Dad, I said, taking a deep breath. I didn't call to fight. I called because I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's been going on. I waited for him to respond, but there was only silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now, as if he were trying to hold something back. Fine, he muttered. Come over. Let's talk. The next day, I made the trip to the old shop. I hadn't been there in months, but something about the familiar smell of oil and gasoline was comforting. It brought back memories of simpler times, before everything became so complicated. When I walked inside, my father was sitting at his workbench, wiping his hands with a rag. He didn't look up when I entered, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to start the conversation. But then he looked up at me, his face tired, older than I remembered. "You don't need to sit down," he grumbled, his voice strained. "What do you want to talk about?" I took a deep breath. "Dad, I don't know how we got here. But I don't want to keep fighting. I don't want us to be like this." "Like what?" he snapped. "You think you're better than me now, don't you? You think you built something so great that I'm just some old fool who has nothing to offer." "No, that's not it," I said quickly. "It's not about that. I hesitated. How do you explain a lifetime of disappointment, of hurt, of dreams you've had to put aside for the sake of family? I just don't want to keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. What you did at the meeting, that wasn't okay. And I don't want to fight you, but I can't let you think you have a claim on my company. I built it." He stared at me for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want you to leave, you know. I thought you'd come back. I thought you'd see that this was all I had to offer. That you'd see that this business, was all I could give you. I don't know how to be anything else." His words hit me harder than I expected. There was no excuse for how he had acted, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimpse of understanding. This wasn't about the business. It was about him. And it was about me, too, about both of us realizing that we had been living in different worlds for far too long. "I don't want to hurt you, Dad," I said softly. "But I can't let you take credit for everything I've worked for. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm just asking for you to let me be who I am. And maybe, in time, we can figure out how to move forward." He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he just looked down at his hands. Then, after what felt like forever, he muttered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to say either." The silence hung between us, thick and heavy. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe there was a chance for healing. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but somewhere down the line. And in that moment, I realized that while we may never see eye to eye, we might just find a way to move beyond the bitterness and build something new, not as father and daughter, but as two people learning to coexist. But for now, I still don't know where this will lead. All I know is that I'm still standing, still pushing forward. And I'm not going to let anyone, not even my father, stop me from doing what I've worked so hard to achieve. I guess that's where I'm at right now. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, but I know I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. I'm struggling, but I've come too far to back down. Does anyone have advice for dealing with a situation like this? I'm trying to figure out how to balance family and business without losing myself in the process. I'm not sure what I expected when I walked into that shop that day, but what I got was something I wasn't prepared for. My father's apology, though quiet and strained, was a moment of vulnerability I hadn't seen in years. It was the first real sign that he was acknowledging the mess he had made, even if it wasn't entirely his fault. It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for, but it was something I could work with. I left his shop that day, my mind racing with conflicting thoughts. I wanted to believe that things could change between us, that we could figure out how to coexist in each other's lives without all the drama. But deep down, I knew that change wasn't going to come easily, and maybe, it wasn't even something I could fix. My father had always been someone who stuck to his ways, who believed that hard work was the only way to get ahead. And for him, that meant claiming ownership of everything around him, including me. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I focused on my business, making sure my team was on track and that we were still expanding. Catalyst Innovations was doing well, despite the drama surrounding my father. Investors remained confident in me, and clients kept coming in. But the shadow of my father's actions hung over me like a dark cloud. Then came the day I received the letter. It was from my father's lawyer. At first, I thought it was just more of the same: threats, accusations, demands for a share of my company. But this letter was different. The lawyer's tone was sharp and official, and the contents were clear: my father was suing me. He was claiming ownership of Catalyst Innovations, based on the argument that without his teachings, I would never have been able to build the business. His legal team argued that the knowledge he passed down to me through the years gave me the foundation to build my tech company, and he believed he was entitled to a portion of the profits. At first, I was furious. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after firing him in front of my team, after months of dealing with his ego and his manipulation, he still thought he had a right to my company? But then, something clicked. This wasn't just a battle over money or power anymore. It was a matter of principle. I wasn't going to let him destroy what I had worked so hard for. I wasn't going to let him walk in and claim something that was never his. This wasn't about family anymore, it was about protecting what I had built. I spent the next few weeks putting together my defense. I worked with my lawyers, gathered all the documentation and evidence I needed to show that my company was completely separate from his business and that any claim he made to my intellectual property was invalid. I prepared myself for a long, drawn-out battle, but I was ready. I had spent too many years building my business to let it slip away so easily. And then, the real twist came. It was a Wednesday afternoon when my lawyer called me with the news. "Olivia," he said, his voice calm but urgent, "I just got off the phone with your father's attorney. They're dropping the lawsuit." I blinked in disbelief. What? Why? It seems they realized something. They found a little detail they didn't consider before. Apparently, they didn't have all their facts straight about the ownership of your company's intellectual property. There's no evidence to support their claims that your father helped develop your business. In fact, the work you've done is entirely separate from anything he could have contributed. The realization hit me like a wave. My father's claim had no basis in reality. It was nothing but a power play, an attempt to pull me down into his world of control and manipulation. But now, it seemed like the tide was turning in my favor. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. Not because I wanted to ruin my father, but because I had fought for something that mattered to me, something I had built. And in the end, I had won. A few weeks later, I received another call from my father. I was surprised to hear from him, but I answered anyway, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Olivia," he said, his voice tight. "I've been thinking about everything. About the lawsuit, and about what I did." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "I don't want your business. I don't want to fight anymore," he said, sounding almost defeated. "You're right. I don't have any claim to it. I was just angry. I felt like I'd lost you, like everything I did was for nothing." His words were hard to hear, but there was a part of me that felt sympathy for him. He had been so consumed by his own insecurities, his own sense of failure, that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. I wasn't trying to take anything from him. I just wanted to build my own life. "I never wanted you to feel like I was abandoning you, Dad," I said softly. "But you have to understand that I've worked for this. I've worked hard for everything I built. And I can't just give it up because you're upset." "I know," he said quietly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm sorry. I guess I had to lose everything to understand that." For the first time in years, I felt like my father wasn't just speaking out of pride or anger. He was speaking from a place of regret. And though it didn't erase everything that had happened, it was a step towards something that felt like closure. The following months were quieter. My father and I didn't have a miraculous reconciliation, but there was a change. I found myself visiting him more often, not to ask for his approval, but just to spend time with him, something that felt almost foreign at first, but necessary. I didn't expect him to change overnight, but there was a new understanding between us. I realized that I didn't need his approval to be successful, but I did need to let go of the bitterness I'd been holding on to for so long. Catalyst Innovations continued to thrive. I expanded the company's services, brought in new partners, and watched it grow into something I was incredibly proud of. The whole ordeal with my father had been a wake-up call, a reminder that family relationships could be just as complex and difficult as business ones. But I had come out stronger, more resilient, and more determined to protect what I had built. As for my father, he continued running his auto shop, though I could see he was trying to adapt. He had started to hire help, expanding his business in small ways he had never considered before. He wasn't going to change entirely, and I knew I couldn't change him. But he had learned to respect me, and I had learned to let go of the guilt I'd been carrying for so long. It's been a year since all of this went down, and I look back on it with a sense of accomplishment, not just in my business, but in my ability to stand my ground, to fight for what I believed in, and to finally stop letting the past dictate my future. My father and I don't have a perfect relationship, but we have something more important, a mutual understanding that we can exist separately, but still be a part of each other's lives, in our own ways. I got the last word, not by being cruel, but by proving that I didn't need him to succeed. The business I built is mine, and I'll be damned if anyone tries to take it away from me again. But what I've learned through all of this is that the real victory wasn't just in firing my father or beating him in court, it was in realizing that the true strength comes from within, from knowing who you are, and from not letting anyone define you, no matter who they are. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about getting back at someone, it's about proving you're better than the worst they ever thought of you.